geopolitical commentator and investigative journalist. You're listening to Pelle Neroth Taylor on today's News Talk, The Pulse.
Welcome to the Pelle Neroth Taylor Show. We've got Robert Cibis with us today. He's a versatile producer, director, and maker of films, documentaries, and TV shows, as well as a book publisher and editor-in-chief of OVAL.media. He's a jack of all trades who's made it his mission to convey a new perspective on the mechanics of power. His goal is to make the user an active citizen by fostering a deeper understanding of the world around us. Through a variety of media, film, TV, etc., he persistently pursues this mission. And we had him on a couple of weeks ago on the panel where he discussed NATO's involvement in the whole COVID thing as a means to, I think, lower the deflation crisis that was affecting the Western world and gets to spend more through massive public spending that the COVID crisis involved. So it's basically an economic measure, and as such, it was a propaganda measure on top of it to get our societies locked down and to justify a mass spending spree. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Thank you for having me, Pelle.
Tell us a little bit about because you were reading something. There was something in the German media, the BND put something out recently that you wanted to draw to our attention that actually brought the story forward from what we knew a few weeks ago.
Yes, it's really interesting because what I observe now is that a lot of dissidents, people who are critical of the governments, critical of the measures during the so-called COVID crisis, very much go along with the narrative of the lab leak. And I think there are some fundamental issues which have to be put forward now. I mean, the first question, of course, everybody would need to ask is, did we have a public health emergency in 2020? So, and then, of course, second to this is, has it been a virus or bacteria, something spreading from a specific point? So the thing is that we have to see, this has been the most extensive propaganda machinery our planet has ever lived. We had massive flooding the zone on all media in all countries. By the way, I think this has been only possible because most listeners and readers and viewers don't pay for the media. So it's important to have independent structures which really do work for the listeners and for the viewers and the readers. But that's just a side point. The main point is that we had completely absurd messages all over the world, and thus we have to ask the right questions, and we have to see the tactics of manipulation. So one very important tactic is to raise the wrong question or to just put out a narrative with a false dichotomy. So from the first weeks on, in all media, mainstream media, the wet market, of course, has been mentioned in Wuhan, and then the high security lab and close to it. Of course, they said there is no relationship between the lab and the wet market. And, every critical mind, as we all are, says maybe they're just covering something up or maybe they're hiding something. So instead of asking the real necessary question, do we have a public health crisis? How many people are dying? What is the infection mortality rate? We ask, does it come out of a lab or is it a zoonotic, spillover? And that's the point. Now we have Robert Redfield, the guy who has been head of CDC in the United States, telling to the media, look, I think it has been a lab leak. In 2024, we had Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State in the United States, saying the same thing. And we had the FBI, and now we have the German Secret Service. And the worst of all, propagandist media in Germany, Die Zeit and the Süddeutsche Zeitung, which are, by the way, co-funded by the US government. There was an investigation published in another public broadcaster in Germany. These these two newspapers in Germany have the new investigative story that, in fact, German government knew that the virus came from a lab. So
just to stop you there, just to summarize what you're saying. So basically, I was on the wrong track there in my intro, because I was saying, well, maybe we're getting towards the story now because serious newspapers are having second thoughts. They're realizing it came from the lab. But what you're saying is the whole propaganda thing was, propaganda is about getting you to look in one place rather than another place. And this false dichotomy, false choices, you're saying, oh, clever minds are working out if it's option 1 or option 2. And all of us clever people knew it was option 2, but the idiots thought it was option 1. But it turns out that we clever people are idiots too, because it was neither option 1 nor option 2. It was a third option. That's what you're getting at, isn't it?
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So carry on with the story. So
yes.
I'm just going to say that the Telegraph picked up this German story. The Germany covered up an explosive intelligence report that found a strong probability that the COVID pandemic was caused by a laboratory accident in China. A joint investigation by 2 German newspapers alleges that Angela Merkel, the then Chancellor, and a successful Olaf Scholz both turned a blind eye to the report produced by Germany's Foreign Intelligence Agency, the BND. According to Süddeutsche Zeitung and Die Zeit, the BND concluded in 2020 that an accident from a laboratory in Wuhan led to the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic. So, I mean, somebody who's a little bit clued up, but still a bit naive, thinks, oh, well, these guys, the intelligence agencies and the Süddeutsche, they finally realized the error of their ways. But of course, maybe they're just lying all the time. And they're lying about this too. It's a kind of information operation to get us to realize it's option 2 after all and not option 1, when the reality is option 3, which is the one you're going to present to me right now. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I mean,
okay, so
we have to question the premises. And if something comes out of the people who lied to you during 5 years, then you might rightly ask the question, should we trust them now? Should we trust Robert Redfield now or Mike Pompeo or the German government when they obviously lied about it in the first place? So, in fact, it's a very typical strategy. It's like having, 2 political parties and both are kind of proposing the same political change, as if it's the only way that goes. So the narrative of having no alternative is very, very successful, even with critical minds. So, in fact, we don't see in any epidemiological data any epidemic in no country. If you look at it from a scientific point of view, nothing is happening in any country, even in China, even in the province of Hubei, in Wuhan, and so on. There are no additional cases of strong respiratory diseases or pneumonia than usually. If you look at the mortality, you have to simply look at, let's say, a woman 56 years old. What is her chance of dying in 2020 compared to 2019, 2018, 2017? And if you make this comparison, you see that, in fact, 2020 was a good year. The risk of dying was quite low. I'm emphasizing this because what we are confronted with are mortality statistics which are either giving absolute numbers. So if you have an aging society, then it's misleading because you might have more people in absolute figures dying in 2020 than in 2019. But if you see it like by age group and by gender, then you can judge of it. And of course, you have to compare the years. And it all changes in 2021, but that's another story. So if you just see, I just give you another example of how the narrative is twisted. In the beginning of December 2024, so last year, the US Congress published a 500-page report on the measures and said, oh, yes, we made a lot of mistakes. So a lot of things for which, people would have been, smeared, and for which people would have lost their jobs and so on. They said, yes, it's true, social distancing wasn't a good idea and maybe more harmful than useful, and same with the lockdowns, or same with the the closing of the schools and other measures. However, probably the virus came from a lab, and the jabs have been wonderful. So there are two issues which are always, protected. One is, yes, we had a pandemic. Yes, the jabs really helped. Because if you question these premises, you're on the wrong side. So for the first question, I started to answer it saying that there has been no epidemic data saying that there was an epidemic. And I can just add to it, of course, people have pneumonia. Of course, people are ill. And half of the people dying who are older than 80 will have pneumonia when they're dying, because this is when you have cancer or other diseases. Often you die with a respiratory disease in addition to it, because if your immune system is weak, the bacteria and the viruses have more space, and the ones which you carry all the time with you will take over. And so if you then say, look, we had 1,000 people dying with pneumonia today in Germany, then it's a complete normal number, because there are more than 2,500 people dying each day. So it's very easy to build up a narrative if you do the testing, and the testing then asks for more testing, because if somebody is positive, then you have to test the people around that person, and the test has been so unspecific, so sensitive, that you could have positive results all over the planet. So as long as you started testing, you could observe cases, and then you had this dashboard with cases, and this is all a simulation. It doesn't mean
so basically
that
you said you can get a PCR test positive from an avocado or something like that, or a pair of shoes. I mean, ridiculous cases like that. I remember that. Yeah. And so it was an epidemic of testing. The more you test, the more you're likely to get a positive example. And even I could understand that. But are you saying that the virus literally didn't exist, or was it? I mean, I'm not a scientist, but I mean, they did all these. They had presumably more sophisticated tests than the PCR tests. And of course, you had all those people on ventilators. I mean, they weren't simulating; they really died. Did they die of something else?
So you had, in some elderly homes and in some hospitals, a lot of people dying during 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, either end of March or beginning of April. And if you just see the statistics, it's obvious that this is no epidemic. It looks as if, let's say the drinking water has been poisoned. So as if from outside some impact have an effect on the people. So how can you explain this? There are various levels to explain this, but the pure fact that you had it in that hospital but not in this hospital already says that it's probably not an epidemic. The pure fact that it was an exponential spike and it went down after 2 weeks and didn't have any further impact on the population also suggests it's not a pandemic, or not an epidemic, even on a small scale. So you had very deadly treatments which were proposed both by the national health authorities and the World Health Organization. They gave the opposite medication to what would make sense. Midazolam is an example for it. If you have problems breathing and this medication slows your breathing, it can kill you. Another example is that they were said to not use antibiotics anymore. So, of course, if you have pneumonia and you have a weak immune system, bacteria will take over. Whatever the main virus or germ is which made you ill in the first place, you need antibiotics. It's the most common medication for these kind of patients, but they were not used during this periods. And the ventilation, which you alluded to, is the same story. The ventilation simply killed people. So you clearly see the more ventilation has been undertaken in hospitals, the more dead patients we had. but remdesivir, another medication, is extremely harmful and creates damage to many organs in the body. And studies, have been incredibly bad for this. It has not been used, and then they promoted it as the big solution to this novel virus. And in fact, I suspect that this was murder, in fact, because they knew that it would be harmful, and if you give this to weak people in intensive care, it could also kill them. So there are a lot of reasons, and I should stress also that you had the healthcare personnel which were tested, and through the tests, a lot of people were not allowed to come to do their job anymore, and the whole system has been overloaded by this. And of course, people were afraid. There's also a psychological dimension. If people are afraid of being in contact with you, if you're old and if you're weak and if you're ill and you're not in contact anymore with your beloved ones, and even the nurse is not coming into your room, it also weakens you and has a negative impact on your health. So it's a long list, and I probably forgot half of it.
No. So it literally didn't exist.
Not an epidemic.
People didn't go to seek treatment for their problems. Nurses and doctors couldn't turn up to treat people. And so any mortality there was a result of those things rather than this non-existent epidemic. And then what you're saying is some of the cures, like remdesivir, caused deaths. And then people say, oh, well, we told you the medicine was needed because you see people dying now, but they were dying of the remdesivir and not of the epidemic. That's it. But you're saying what? I mean, I'm not a doctor. I mean, maybe if a doctor was sitting on a panel with us, he'd say, "Well, come on, I do tests X, Y, Z. We can see these molecules in our microscopes. What are you talking about? Of course, it exists. Are you saying it literally doesn't exist? The COVID thing?"
Oh no! We always have coronaviruses. About 10 to 15% of all pneumonia are with a coronavirus. And of course they exist. The only thing which there's no evidence for is that we had a novel coronavirus.
Right.
It's why would there's no indication for anything novel anywhere on the planet. And of course, there's no indication for that there was a hotspot in China. I think that the whole story is fake. There's no reason to believe that the first patients with a novel virus have been in China, and that this virus over there has been completely different to all other coronaviruses.
Right.
It's simply, if it's so often repeated that, even I have to say to myself, look, it's what they say in the media, and they lied so much about so many things. There's no reason to believe it just because they said it. So I'm just a science filmmaker. I did a lot of science documentaries. So I'm just telling you what experts told me. I can relate to Dr. Wodak, J.J. Kui, or many more who, of course, said that, look, there's nothing novel about it.
Just to interrupt. So presumably what you're saying is, I mean, the coronavirus, they come in different variations, presumably, depending on the year. So if we went back to 2015 or something, we would find coronaviruses circulating in human being systems. It's just that we weren't looking for them then. And so we weren't able to take the perspective. And now we started looking. We'd nominated this coronavirus as being a danger, and we found it. And then we said that's the cause of this mortality that isn't existing, basically. Do you understand?
That's correct. In fact, there are studies done in Scotland by Professor Nick Bush, and she did the coronavirus prevalence studies over a long period of time, and starting in 2010 and the years on, and you see that it's always 10 to 15%, and you have to say also that most viruses creating pneumonia cannot be tested. You only can test 10% of all groups of viruses. And then the issue, what does it mean to have a novel coronavirus? And a coronavirus is an RNA virus, and RNA mutates very, very, very easily. So even if we are in the same room and, I got the virus from you, we might have a different variant. And if it goes from one town to the next town, it will be quite different, and so the whole idea of having a vaccine for the same thing in the whole planet is completely absurd.
Robert, we'll get onto the jabs in just a second because we've got about 3 minutes left. But you're saying that these coronaviruses that were always circulating in our body, we just weren't looking for them, and they had rapidly mutating. Were they the cause of this pneumonia that was killing people in past years as well, or was it only this latest one? I mean, do coronaviruses mingle with the pneumonia-causing pathogen, or are they coexisting with it and not an attribute to the death cause in past years, or was it harmless? Yep.
The point that I'm making here is that this is the wrong question. You just have to see at the mortality figures. I can say it for Germany. Germany has a quite stable healthcare system.
No, I believe you.
If you have a time machine, the average age of dying with COVID officially has been 83 years old in Germany. So if you're 83 years old and you had a time machine and you had to choose which is the year in which the mortality is lowest, then you would have chosen 2020, because 2018 was much worse. Significantly
I understand. Sorry,
2021 too.
I understand. I think I said the coronaviruses can be sort of dangerous, but this year's mutation of the coronavirus was no more dangerous than past year's coronaviruses, which come in many types and cause colds and things like that. It's just that we didn't nominate the past coronaviruses because we didn't think to look, or no one told us to look there and nominate it. Okay, do you follow me?
Yes, that's correct. I just want to stress, in the years before, people tested for influenza and not coronavirus, and then they tested for coronavirus and not influenza.
Right, exactly.
So
the influenza disappeared exactly in the year 2020. Then no one died of influenza anymore. Isn't that strange?
Exactly.
Sorry, we've got 2 minutes left. Just tell us about the jabs quickly. Are the jabs then the real killer? I mean, were they dangerous?
Yes. No, of course. I mean, if you are afraid of bioweapons, be afraid of what they put into your blood system, in your vessels. The jabs are a bioweapon. And I have to stress one thing also. There's a wrong perception of, what they can do in the labs. Our immune system is so complicated. Nobody on the planet really understands it. It has various layers, and it adapts extremely fast to all kinds of molecules and, viruses and bacteria and everything. If we train it all the time, it's extremely strong. The moment our immune system is deactivated because we get the danger within our body, we have a problem. Because the immune system has a clear outside and inside. And the outside is not just our skin, but also what we eat and drink. Most poisons, you could drink them. But if you get them into your blood system, it might kill you. So this is what we have
Robert,
to see.
I'm afraid, we've got to wind up there. An incredible story. It's a total gestalt shift for me and many of our listeners, I guess. Incredibly interesting. And we'll have you on again to discuss further details. Thank you so much, Robert Cibis.